be. Oh, by yourself on your pew there this morning. I just noticed that this morning. So chapter 18, verse 2. And so, of course, we looked at in chapter 17, Micah had this crazy story of Micah and his stealing from his mother. And his mother, he finally feels guilty and tells his mother. And his mother, instead of, getting mad at him, she's like, well, God blesses you. And she's like, well, I decided to dedicate that money to you anyways. And I wanted, really to God. But I wanted to give it to you to make idols, which is crazy. So we looked at chapter 17. It's really just a focus upon, it's really denominationalism today. And the center verse was verse 6. Said, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. That's really a summary of chapter 17 and chapter 18. Because chapter 17, we're talking about Micah and this Levite man, we're never given his name, but this Levite who becomes Micah's priest in his own house of worship. They profess to be worshiping God. Micah is trying to do something similar to what God said in his word. And so it's really like denominationalism, because many in the denominational world, they claim that they are following God. They claim they love God. And they may take pieces and parts of God's law and apply them to their religion and what they teach, but yet they're not following him. And that's exactly what Micah is doing here. And so chapter 18, we're going to be introduced to the Danites. Now, as we talked about with the Danites, is that they are, of course, we're told to take possession of the land. What was that? That was Joshua 19. But the Danites, if you look at our map, this was the land that God had promised to them. They were told to defeat the Canaanites that were in this area and take possession of that land. First part of Judges chapter 1, we find out that instead of doing what God said, they were scared, and they let the Canaanites drive them into the mountains. And so chapter 18 is telling us of when the Danites, who have run out of land, they don't have a place really to live for their people. I think the census we had in our notes here, there was 64,400 males of 20 years old in the last census. Quite a few, and that means, as we talked about the Israelites this morning, there was like 1 million I was a little under 1 million, but when you total the amount of children and families, it was over probably closer to 2 or 3 million people that came out of Israel or out of Egypt. The same thing is here with Danites. There's probably, close to 100,000, 200,000 of them, and they're all in these little spot in the mountains trying to live. Well, they want to find their own land, and so their choice, verse 1, it says, chapter 18, those days there's no king in Israel, and in those days a tribe of the Danites were seeking an inheritance for themselves to dwell in, for until that day their inheritance among the tribes of Israel had not fallen to them. So it hadn't fallen to them because they had not captured it. They had not done what God had told them to do. Judges chapter 1 and verse 34. And so they had two options. The option of, let's do what God said. Let's capture the land that God said. Or let's go find people that are easy to defeat and take their land. And so chapter 18 is that. Because what they're going to do, if you notice on this map, which I know it's hard to see, we have the tribe of Dan down here, but for some reason, all the way up here in the north, we have a city named Dan. That is where they end up going. So that's chapter 18. So verse 2, that's kind of an overview of what we looked at last week. So verse 2, it says, so the children of Dan sent 5 men of their family from their territory, men of valor, from Zorah and Eshtaol, to spy out the land and search it. They said to them, go search the land. So they went to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. And so they send basically 5 spies, 5 men of valor, that is now going to go out and spy and find some land for them. What was interesting about Zorah and Eshtaol? What was significant about those cities? Who else was from that area? Samson. So Samson was from this same area. Now, chapter 17 and 18 really seem to fall before the time of Samson. This would have been more in line with really right after the time of the death of Joshua. So that would be more of chapter 1, chapter 2 timeline. Because Judges is not chronological. As we're going to see, really the last part of the book of Judges really falls earlier in time than what we see with the events. I know at the beginning, which has been a long time ago, I handed out a timeline of Judges. And if you look at, Holly has one there. If you look at Samson's really later in that timeline of that 400-year period in Judges, close to when we see the book of 1 Samuel. And so these events seem to have fallen earlier in time. In talking about when Dan chose to do this really something going against God. And so it tells us that there was these 5 men of valor. Word study says that this word means strength or influence. So they were men of influence, they were men of great strength who went out to spy. Clark says, quote, the Hebrew word has been applied to personal prowess, to mental energy, and to earthly possessions. They sent those in whose courage, judgment, and prudence they could safely confide. So yeah, it talks about their strength. These are men of great strength. But they were men that they trusted to find a new place for them. And so they go out.
If they lived in this mountain, it wasn't happy there.
Yeah.
Then why did they go to the mountain of Ephraim?
The mountain of Ephraim is in this same area. Right here, in the same area. That's where they were hiding, or they had went up, because if you go back to Judges 1:34, that's where they went and hide, is in the mountains of Ephraim.
So this is where they still live?
Yes.
I mean, this wasn't the new land they were searching?
No, the new land they're going to find is going to be up there in the northern part of the country, closer to Assyria at that time. And so, yeah, they're hiding in these mountains of Ephraim, or living in that area, as we find in Judges 1:34. And so, verse 3. Verse 3. While they were at the house of Micah, okay, so they now have reached the house of Micah. While they were at the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. What is this Levite to Micah, as we talked about? His priest. So here they reach the house of Micah and they stay with him. I don't know why. Maybe it was a place that they could lodge. Maybe he had a place for people to stay. It doesn't tell us, but it's interesting that they end up in the same area of Micah here. And here they hear this young man and they understand. Notice the rest of that verse. It says, they turned aside and said to him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What do you have here? What was significant about his voice? What do you think that when they recognized his voice, they were wondering, why are you in this area? What would probably have been, his dialect, probably how he spoke. His accent, right? They heard his accent and they said, wait a second. That doesn't sound like somebody from this area. Exactly. And so they're going, well, what are you here for? Why are you in this area? Verse 3. So then in verse 4, he answers them. He said to them, thus and so Micah did for me. That means he tells them the story of what had happened. He has hired me, and I have become his priest. So again, as we talked about in chapter 17, he is a Levite who has been given a purpose by God. He didn't have a problem with Micah just hiring him to live with him and be basically his high priest of his worship area. Now, and he is he's a child of Israel. He is supposed to be following God, and he didn't have a problem with that. Now we have Danite men who are also children of Israel, who should know better, and here he is, and these men, and he tells them, well, I just became their priest. So notice verse 5. It says, so to him, please inquire of God that we may know whether the journey on which we go will be prosperous. Why did not the Danites say, well, why are you a priest?
Because priesthood at that time was considered a communication tool between God and people.
Exactly. So that's why they asked him, hey, won't you inquire of God for us? That's why they did that. But why did they not have a problem with the fact that he said, I was hired by this man to be his priest? We're just seeing again the character, the moral decline of Israel here. Remember, the key verse is verse 6 in chapter 17. Every man did what was right in their own eyes. They were not following God. They were doing what they thought was fine. This Levite man became a priest by being paid to be a priest. He's not serving God. He's serving this man. Remember, he wanted him to be his spiritual father. He wanted him to be his priest. The Danites, who should be following God, hear that he has done this, and instead of rebuking him and saying, well, that's not what God said you're supposed to do, they're like, hey, why don't you talk to God for us? It's crazy. We're just seeing their moral decline. We're seeing they're turning their backs on God. And so verse 5, as we're saying here, the Danite men use the word Elohim, which is used, I'm probably not saying that right, the Hebrew word, but it's used to describe God. They said, well, he's a Levite, therefore if he's saying he's a priest, he can talk to God for us. He can inquire of God about their journey. It's just crazy to me. Verse 6, it says, and the priest said to him, go in peace, the presence of the Lord be with you on your way. Was he right? Did he ask God? Did God tell him, this Levite man who is not qualified to be a priest, who is doing something against what God said, is he telling them the truth? No. He's giving them what they want to hear. And not only that, what did God tell them? Where did God tell them to live? Right there. Yeah, in that area. That's where they're supposed to be. And what are they choosing to do? Go against God's will and go do something else. And yet, this man tells them, yeah, you're doing great. God's happy with you. Paraphrasing there. Go in peace. The presence of the Lord be with you on your way. That's not the case. They're choosing to go against God. Again, apply that to today. How many people in the denominational world believe that they're doing the right thing? We're being told Sunday morning right now, many people in this world are meeting in a church building, and a preacher is telling them they're doing just fine, that they're following God, that they're doing what God says is pleasing, that is right with him. That's not right. And could they have found the answer? Could they have went and inquired and found what God had said about this man being a Levite and choosing to be a priest? Could they have found what God wanted them to do with where they were to live? Yes. They had the law. They had what was written to them. And they chose to do different. Many people do the same thing. And so, of course, that makes them feel good. So verse 7, so the 5 men departed and went to Laish. They saw the people who were there, how they dwelt safely in the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. There were no rulers in the land who might put them to shame for anything. They were far from the Sidonians, and they had no ties with anyone. Yeah.
No, sorry, jumping back a verse. Do you know what the time difference was between when they were told to go into that land and take it and then now?
No, I do not. I did not look into that. It's believed that chapter 18 is around the time of the death of Joshua, so that would put it the end of the book of Joshua, first of Judges. So, they were told in the book of Joshua what they were supposed to capture, what they were supposed to take, and they didn't do it. I don't know. I would say it's got to be within a few years.
Okay, so it's not like it's been 500 years and they've forgotten or
No.
whatever.
No, it wouldn't be. They just, like I said, let's just go back real quick. Judges chapter 1. Notice verse, I think it's verse 34. I know I've mentioned that several times. Well, it helps us to understand what we're seeing here. Judges 1 and verse 34 says, "And Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountains, for they would not allow them to come down to the valley." And so, at the end of chapter 1 is they're failing to do what God says. Their incomplete conquest of the land, as it's titled there. And the Danites were just one of those people who didn't have the faith and the strength to do what God said to do. I mean, as we've talked about through the book of Judges, when God said to go do something, he had already defeated those people before they even went in. All they had to do was do the work. It's kind of like what you were talking about in your third point. The water is there. We have to go take it. We have to go receive salvation. God can't force us. He could have forced them, but he didn't. He let them make the choice. And the Danites chose to turn their backs on God and not have the faith that they should have. And so, verse 7, going back to chapter 18 and verse 7, here they go to, remember I said at the beginning of this chapter, they're going to find a weak people. What did they find? They found a people who dwelt in safety. That means they didn't have any threats of anyone around them. In the manner of the Sidonians, which was maybe their only tie, maybe their only relationship that they had, but they lived far away from them. They were quiet and secure. They didn't have any rulers. And notice there it says, who might put them to shame for anything. What does that mean? Put them to shame.
They could do whatever they wanted and no one was going to say it.
Exactly. They could do whatever they wanted and no one was going to stop them. And so instead of defeating the Amorites, who were a very strong people, the Philistines were always an oppression to them. The Amorites in that area were always an oppression to them. They were a strong fighting people. But instead of the Danites defeating them as God said, they went and found a people that were going to be very easy to capture, easy to defeat. And that's what they were looking for, and they found that. Now remember, Laish is this city of Dan. Later it's going to be called Dan. So they're up in this area, all the way up here, which is close to Syria. Syria is Damascus, it's a part of Syria. Yeah.
I just find it interesting because they said that they did that so that way nobody could put them to shame. It just makes me think of the path of least resistance, how often we try to do the easy thing just because it's easier.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a reason that God told them to be strong and good courage, and it's the same for us today, how easy it is to be, that's kind of a difficult thing to go teach that person or whatever the case might be. The path of least resistance is almost always not the right path.
Yeah, I like that. That's right. Because they chose the easiest path they could do. And and it didn't go work out for them at all, for sure. That's a good point. And so they find these people have no law, no authority, they have nothing. They're easy people to defeat. And so verse 8 says, "Then the spies came back to their brethren at Zorah and Eshtaol, and there their brother said to him, 'What is your report?' Verse 9, it says, 'And they said, Arise, let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and indeed it is very good. Would you do nothing? Do not hesitate to go and enter to possess the land. When you go, you will come to a secure people and a large land, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth.'" Verse 11, "And 600 men of the family of the Danites went from there, from Zorah and Eshtaol, armed with weapons of war." I think it's interesting. When I was reading this, I thought of the spies that went into the land in the first, back when they were in the wilderness. 10 of them said, "Well, we can't defeat them. They're terrible." 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, "It's a great land. God has given this to us. Let's go capture it. Let's go take it." That's what these men were doing here, but really was God blessing them? No. Some may say, well, God was blessing them, but when they get up there, as we're going to see, if you read the rest of this chapter, if we get to it today, they go into this land, and then the first thing they do is start serving idols. That God was not blessing them. This was all in their minds. Many people today do the same thing, the denominational world. Well, God's blessing me for this. God is blessing their denomination and the things they're doing. God is not blessing them. Go ahead.
I was saying the first thing they did when they went back to the house where they had been welcomed, the first thing they do is steal from them.
Yep. Exactly. Everything they're doing in this whole process is not what God would want. It's just amazing their blindness. They're lying to themselves. They're trying to believe that God is supporting what they're doing here, and they're not. And unfortunately, I keep going back to that, but many today are in that situation. And so they reported that the land was great, it was easy to take. And so 600 of the men go out. We're going to find out that these 600 men also went with their families with them up to capture this land. And so that brings us to verse 12. It says, so they went up and encamped in Kirjath-jearim in Judah. Therefore they call that place Mahanaim Dan to this day. There it is west of Kirjath-jearim. And they passed from there to the mountains of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. The Kirjath-jearim it means city of forest. Mahanaim Dan is a camp of Dan, so we see that there. This is the name that's used during the time of Samson. Somebody go back to Judges 13, please, and read verse 25. Judges 13 and verse 25.
And the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan between Zorah and Ashtaroth.
Okay, so as we talk about timeline, here it's called Camp of Dan. They call it Camp of Dan, Mahanaim Dan. This was named at this point, but then later in history, Samson's there in Judges 13. So that kind of points to why these events are before Samson, because they named this city or this place, and Samson is found there later. And so just looking at the timeline. And so verse 13 again, they passed from there to the mountains of Ephraim, came to the house of Micah. Then the 5 men who were gone to spy out the country of Laish answered and said to their brethren, do you know that there are in these houses an ephod, household idols, a carved image, and a molten image? Now therefore consider what you should do. I think that's an interesting phrase. These men tell these 600, hey, do you know that in this guy's house we saw, as we talked about, these idols were probably very expensive. Remember, it took, 1,200 shekels of silver. It took 200 to pay or 1,100, not 1,200. It was 200 to pay the man to make these images, and then the rest of that money was used to make the carved images, so the molten and the graven. And so they're probably pretty valuable. And they notice also all the other idols that are there. And these men say, hey, we want to just tell you this. Hey, there's these idols in here. Last part of that verse is, I lost my verse, sorry. Verse 14. It says, now therefore consider what you should do. What do they mean by that? It's like, hey, there's these very expensive idols, these things that are really nice in this house. Consider what you're going to do now. What's that mean? Let's go steal it. Verse 15, so they returned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite man, to the house of Micah, and greeted him. The 600 men, armed with their weapons of war, who were the children of Dan, stood by the entrance of the gate. Then the 5 men who were gone to spy out the land went up. Entering there, they took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molten image. The priests stood at the entrance of the gate with the 600 men who were armed with the weapons of war. And so here, this man, Micah, showed them hospitality. And as Leaf mentioned earlier, he was very hospitable to them. But the first thing they do is like, hey, let's go back to this guy's house and let's steal everything he has. Just shows again their character is terrible. Their moral decline and the fact that they did not follow God. Here they go and they steal these man's idols, his household idols. But it's interesting because the 600 men stand out at the gate with this Levite, and this Levite man is watching this happen. He's watching these men go in and steal all of these things from this man's house of worship. And he's standing with those 600. So then you get to the next verse. Let's see, verse 20, right? Nope. Verse 18. It says, when these went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molten image, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" And they said to him, "Be quiet. Put your hand over your mouth and come with us. Be a father and a priest to us. Is it better for you to be a priest to the household of one man, or that you be a priest to a tribe of a family of Israel?" Said, just cover your mouth and be quiet and just come with us. It didn't take much for this Levite to become a priest to Micah, right? He told him, "Hey, I'll pay you some money. I'll give you a place to live. You'll become my priest and my spiritual father." They say, "How about you just go with us?" It does kind of seem like they're giving him an option by saying, "Hey, why don't you do this?" But in another sense, it really looks like they're just telling him, "You're going with us. We're taking you with all of this stuff. You don't have a choice." And so, notice the next verse says, "So the priest's heart was glad. And he took the ephod, the household idols, and the carved image, and took his place among the people." He is. Wherever he gets the best deal, that's where he's going to go. Again, the truth does not factor in it. They have no care for what God says. He's now going to be the priest for a large group of people, for the whole Danite tribe, really. And he's looking for a bigger place, more money, more honor. And we were in school talking about this. It was in my notes, so I'd bring it up. But Brother Liddell, when we looked at this, he talked about how a lot of times preachers do this. They're always looking for a bigger place, better money, better this. And it's very similar to that. They're not concerned about the work as much as they are the name, the prestige, and moving. And some do that, move a lot because of that. And so he brought that up as an application for us as students in school. And I thought that was good. And so verse 20, and so then verse 21, it says, "Then they turned and departed and put the little ones, the livestock, and the goods in front of them." Why would they put the children, the goods, their families at the front of the line? There's another time we see this happen. When I read this, I thought about Jacob and Esau, right? When Jacob went to see Esau, he was worried because he thought Esau was going to kill him. And so what did he do? He put his families out front, but his favorite wife, where did he put her? In the back, so to protect her. Unfortunately, that's how he treated his family. But you think about in this situation, they stole this man's things, his household idols. So he puts his families up front because what's he expecting to happen? They're going to come behind and try to attack and get this stuff back. Micah's going to find out, and Micah's going to come and try to get his things back. And so next verse. Verse 22 says, "When they were good away from the house of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house gathered together and overtook the children of Dan." And so Micah, these men that lived around there, these could have been men that worked for Micah. I think more likely it's just the people that lived in this area. They may have used this house of worship with what Micah had already created as their place of worship too. And so they're all upset that these men had taken these idols from them. So then verse 23, it says, "And they called out to the children of Dan, so they turned around and said to Micah, 'What ails you, that you have gathered such a company?'" I think that's kind of funny. They go, here he comes up, they're upset, they go, "What's your problem?" Verse 24, "So he said, 'You have taken away my gods, which I made, and the priests, and have gone away. Now what more do I have? How can you say to me, what ails you?'" I think that's interesting. These were the gods, right? These were the images that his mother had given him, or the money that his mother had given him to make these idols. These were his idols that he bowed down and worshipped. And his first thing is, why have you taken my gods? How illogical is that? Because what is a god supposed to be to them? Someone that is supernatural, right? Someone that is able to defend themselves. They don't need man to defend them. And yet, the idols have been taken away, and he's trying to defend his gods. That makes no sense. And that's, he had created them. If they were more powerful than the one that created them, then they should be able to protect themselves. Isn't that very similar to what happened to Elijah on the Mount Carmel? They had the altars there, and of course Elijah was showing the hypocrisy and the sense of how their God was, Baal was nothing. He was not able to burn up that altar. But I think that's very similar. But I love this. Somebody read Isaiah 44, 14 through 17. Because we're seeing this application here. Isaiah talks about how this happens too. Isaiah 44, 14 through 17.
He cuts down cedars for himself and takes the cypress and the oak. He secures it for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a pine and the rain nourishes it. Then it shall be for a man to burn, for he will take some of it and warm himself. Yes, he kindles it and bakes bread. Indeed, he makes a god and worships it. He makes it a carved image and falls down to it. He burns half of it in the fire. With this half he eats meat. He roasts a roast and is satisfied. He even warms himself and says, "Ah, I am warm.
Yeah.
I have seen the fire."
Yeah. I think that's interesting. Isaiah talks about, yesterday the boys and I went and cut some wood for the bonfire we had last night. I should have used this as an application for them. But, we go and cut that wood, and that's what Isaiah's talking about. The man goes and cuts a tree down. He takes that wood. Some of it he puts into a fire to warm himself, which we did last night. The other part is he uses to cook the food that he needs. Then he takes another piece of that wood and he carves out this image. He puts it up on this pedestal and bows down to it and worships it. Does not make sense. And so that's exactly what's going on here. Micah, he's trying to say, well, I'm serving God. This image, this idol that we have is God, yet he created it. Doesn't make any sense. That's what the Israelites did, didn't they? Somebody read Exodus 20, verse 3 through 5. Exodus 20, 3 through 5.
You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourselves a carved image, any likeness of anything that is in the heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, to the third and fourth generations of those who hate me.
Yeah, so Exodus 20, this is when they were told, this was the law that was given to them, but what happened right before Exodus 20? When Moses went up on Mount Sinai, he comes back to find them doing what?
In 32.
In chapter 32. What did they find the children of Israel? What did Moses find the children of Israel doing? Worshipping a golden calf, who they said was the God that brought them out of Egypt. The same thing that's going on here. Micah said, I want to worship God. I want to praise him. I'm going to create this image that I can worship that represents God. God said, don't do that. God said, that is, do not create these images. And that's, you go to the New Testament now. Somebody read Romans 1, 22 through 25. Romans 1, 22 through 25.
Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts
things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lust of their own hearts, to dishonor their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a life and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen.
All right, so Paul talks about, really in referencing the Gentiles in chapter 1, Romans chapter 1, how they turn God into something that was created. And so, this is what they're doing. The Israelites have a history of this. They turn God into something that's created, which makes no sense, right?
How would
But-
they determine which part was to warm themselves, to cook their food, and which one was God's?
Yeah,
It's very confusing.
yeah, it would be. As I was just told with the boys.
Compartmentalize it.
Yeah, like, okay, which one of these pieces of wood is going to be God,
Go back
Doesn't
to,
work.
where you had me read earlier in
Mhm.
Isaiah 44, it started 19, and it says, and no one considers in his heart, nor is there knowledge nor understanding to say, I have burned half of it in the fire. Yes, I have also baked bread on its coals. I have roasted meat and eaten it. And shall I make the rest of it in an abomination? Shall I fall down before a block of wood?
Yeah, it's crazy.
That's confusing.
It is. Isaiah is saying, this is dumb. Why would you do this? And so, it's easy for us to sit here and do the same thing. Go, why in the world is Micah doing this? Why in the world are the children of Israel doing the same thing? But do we do this today? Can people do this today? Yeah, we're not taking that piece of wood that we cut down yesterday and we're carving an image. It's anything we put before God, right? It can be whatever it is. It can be entertainment. It can be our homes, our jobs, anything we put before God. And all of those things, when we think about what God is supposed to be, it's supposed to be the supernatural that can protect us and provide for us and do all these things, and yet we're turning something that's created into our God. And that's what they're doing. And not at any point is God blessing them in this, because they are completely turned their lives against God. And that is why we see 17 and verse 6, there was no king in Israel. Who was supposed to be their king? God. God was to be their king. And every man did what was right in his own eyes. This is what happens when we turn our backs on God, turn him into the created, and start serving self. Because really today, a lot of people are serving self. What I want to do, what's pleasing to me, that's what they want to do.
It should be pleasing to God if it's pleasing to me.
Yeah.
Will worship is what that's called.
Yeah. When we crucify self, pick up our cross, and follow him, we are aligning our desires and our priorities with God. And you look at our world today, you could bring it down to this point. People are serving self. Every man is doing what is right in their own eyes. And what happens when we do that? We have crime that's going crazy because one person thinks, well, what you have is mine. I can take that. I feel like that's fine. Well, this person said, well, that's mine. No, you can't do that. Well, there's a conflict. There's a problem. That's where crime comes from. That's where killing of babies and all these things that's going on, because everyone's serving self. And so, the book of Judges, this happened thousands of years ago, but it's no different than what's going on in our world today. Every man is doing what is right in their own eyes, and all it does is cause chaos. All that does is cause problems. And if you look at history with the Danites, they go up into this area, the end of the chapter, they serve idols their whole rest of their history until Assyria comes in and destroys them, until Assyria comes in and puts them into captivity. Not once did they follow God. And so there's a lot of similarities to our world today and what we see here for sure. And so that brings us to the next verse. Where do we get to? Verse 25? Yeah, verse 25. It says, and the children of Dan said to him, do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry men fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household. Then the children of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. And so they threaten him. They tell him to be quiet, or he was going to die. It was his life or his possessions. And what did he choose? He chose his life. And so here Micah recognizes their strength, that they're too strong for him. And so once again, his gods, his household gods, could not protect themselves. His household gods could not do anything to protect themselves because they were just objects. And because of that, he had to leave and go home back to his house. And his whole system of worship is now destroyed. He's going to have to start over. And of course, he was professing to follow God, but he was not. All right, any questions on that? We're really going to start a new part here, so I think I might stop here because we're going to, the last part of this I kind of want to do together. But are there any questions or comments on anything? All right.
Micah could look at this, since the blessing is now, so he can start over and start fresh.
Yeah, and do what God said this time, yeah. We're not told if he did or not. This is the last all we hear of Micah, but I'm guessing no. But, all right, thank you guys for your time.